My sister forged my signature on a quitclaim deed, stole the condo our aunt left me, rented it out for 2 years, and pocketed $40,000 in rent while I paid the mortgage, so I let her lose her house. Before we get into this, drop where you're listening from and your local time in the comments. I read everyone. My name is Margaret. I'm 32 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. For 5 years, I worked as a veterinary technician at a 24-hour emergency animal hospital off I-84, the kind of place where you hold golden retrievers while they pass and bottle feed orphaned kittens at 3 in the morning. The clinic was called Cascade Veterinary Emergency, a low concrete building with a glowing blue sign that you could see from the freeway. We were the place people came when their regular vet was closed, when their dog ate a sock at midnight, when their cat was hit by a car on a Sunday afternoon. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and wet fur, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in a frequency that made your teeth ache after hour 10. I worked the overnight shift by choice, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week when we were fully staffed, which was almost never. I chose it partly because it paid a $2 an hour differential that added up to an extra $300 a month, and partly because the world at 4 a.m. made more sense to me than the world at 4 p.m. At 4 a.m., everything was quiet. The phones stopped ringing. The families who'd been waiting for hours had either gone home with good news or were in a consult room receiving the worst news of their lives. The dogs in the ICU kennels slept under heated blankets, their Roman 4 pumps clicking softly. The cats watched me with slow blinks from behind their cage bars. I knew the names of every security guard in the building, the ones who'd wave at me when I limped out to my 2008 Honda Civic at sunrise, my scrubs stiff with dried saline and worse, my sneakers making a squelching sound on the polished concrete floor of the parking garage. The security guard on the morning shift was a man named Earl, 63 years old, who always said, "Morning, Margaret doing the Lord's work," even though I just held animals while vets did the real medicine. I'd smile and say, "Morning, Earl," and then I'd drive home through the gray Portland dawn, the streets empty except for delivery trucks and early morning joggers. I made $43,000 a year, which in Portland in 2019 didn't get you far, but I was proud of it. I had health insurance, dental, a 401k with a 3% match. I shared a cramped 1-bedroom rental in the Richmond neighborhood with a rotating cast of roommates who always seemed to owe me utilities. First, there was Jenna, a barista at a third-wave coffee shop on Division, who left passive-aggressive sticky notes about dish soap on the kitchen counter and moved out owing me $300 for gas and electric. She also took the good shower curtain, the cloth one with the pineapples, and left behind a mildewed plastic liner that smelled like mold every time I turned on the hot water. Then there was Kyle, a line cook at a ramen place on Hawthorne who worked nights too, so we rarely overlapped, which was a mercy, except he had a girlfriend named Rain who basically lived on our couch without paying rent. Rain was a self-described sound healer who owned a collection of Tibetan singing bowls and would sometimes hold impromptu healing sessions in the living room at 2 p.m., which was the middle of my sleep cycle. She'd ring her bowls and chant softly while I tried to sleep with a pillow over my head, and Kyle would apologize but not actually do anything about it. They'd argue about astrology in the kitchen. Kyle was a Capricorn, and Rain was a Leo, and apparently this was a fundamental cosmic problem that required nightly 2-hour discussions at a volume just loud enough to penetrate my closed door. I lived out of 2 plastic storage bins and a garment rack because there wasn't closet space. My mattress was on the floor because the bed frame broke during a move in 2017 and I never replaced it. My pillow was flat and yellowed. My sheets had a hole in them the size of a fist. I didn't complain because complaining felt like a luxury I hadn't earned. My sister Celeste, on the other hand, was a 36-year-old real estate agent with a husband named Derek who managed a car dealership, 2 kids in private Catholic school, and a 5-bedroom colonial in Lake Oswego with a 3-car garage and a heated pool. Their house was the kind of place you see in catalogs, all white baseboards and quartz countertops, and a mudroom with custom cubbies for each kid. The pool was kidney-shaped and had a waterfall feature and underwater lights that changed color. They had a housekeeper who came every Tuesday, a landscaper who manicured the hedges into neat green boxes, and a nanny named Karina who picked up the kids from school and drove them to piano and soccer and Mandarin lessons. They took vacations to Hawaii and Mexico and Disney World, which they'd done 3 times before the kids were 10. Celeste drove a white Lexus SUV with a personalized license plate that said, CL sold. She wore designer yoga pants to school drop-off and carried a handbag that cost more than my monthly rent. She posted Instagram stories of her morning matcha lattes with captions like grateful for this life and blessed beyond measure. She had 400 followers and a highlight reel called Real Estate Queen, where she showed off multi-million-dollar listings in Dunthorpe and the West Hills. Our whole lives, Celeste was the golden child. She got the straight teeth thanks to 3 years of orthodontia that my parents financed with a home equity line of credit. She got the law school boyfriend, who later dumped her, but not before taking her to galas and law firm holiday parties, where she wore floor-length gowns and posted photos that made our relatives gasp with admiration. She got the wedding our parents spent $42,000 on, a June ceremony at a vineyard in the Willamette Valley with a string quartet and a raw oyster bar and a 10-tier cake. I was the maid of honor, which meant I stood next to her in a blush pink dress that I paid for myself, a dress that cost $300 and made me look like a fondant sculpture. I smiled in all the photos. I gave a toast that made our mom cry. I said Celeste was the most driven person I'd ever known, which was true, and that I'd always looked up to her, which was also true, but in a way that had hollowed me out over the years. When we were kids, my parents displayed Celeste's honor roll certificates in the living room in custom frames from Michael's, arranged in a neat row on the wall above the mantel. My art projects went on the refrigerator for a week, held up by a magnet shaped like a Seattle Space Needle, and then into a drawer in the kitchen that eventually became a graveyard of forgotten macaroni necklaces and hand turkeys. Celeste had a sweet 16 party at a rented banquet hall with a DJ, a chocolate fountain, and a photographer who took professional portraits of her in a glittering silver dress that my mom had driven to 3 different malls to find. For my 16th birthday, my dad handed me a card with a $100 bill inside and said, "Maybe you can get those sneakers you wanted," and then he patted my shoulder and went back to watching the Blazers game. I bought the sneakers, a pair of white Reeboks, and I wore them until the soles detached. That was the dynamic in our house. Celeste demanded, and my parents scrambled to provide. I accepted, and my parents were grateful they didn't have to scramble for me. Celeste took, and I surrendered. And I never even noticed I was surrendering because I'd been doing it so long it felt like breathing. It wasn't just my parents. It was teachers at St. Clair's Elementary who'd say, "Oh, you're Celeste's sister." She was such a star. Her 3rd grade diorama on the Oregon Trail is still in the display case. And then look at my math quiz with a red 72 at the top and a faint, puzzled disappointment, like they couldn't figure out where the talent had gone. It was relatives at Christmas who'd hand Celeste an envelope thick with cash, $100, sometimes $200, and give me a scented candle in a gift bag that they'd clearly regifted from someone else. One year, my Aunt Patty, my dad's sister, gave Celeste a check for $500 to help with the wedding fund and gave me a box of potpourri that smelled like a funeral home. She said, "Margaret, you're so low maintenance, I figured you'd appreciate something simple." Low maintenance. That's what they called it. What it actually meant was that no one ever had to try for me. I learned to make myself small, to expect less, to never ask for more because asking just meant a lecture about gratitude and sacrifice and how family pulls together in hard times. My mom, before she got sick, used to say, "Margaret has a big heart, but Celeste has ambition." She meant it as a compliment to both of us, I think. She'd pat my cheek and say, "You get that from your grandmother," which was supposed to soften the fact that she just described me as the understudy in my own life. I heard the subtext. Hearts don't pay mortgages. When our mom died of pancreatic cancer in 2018, Celeste cleaned out her jewelry box before the funeral was over, while I sat in the hospital chapel holding Mom's hand until the monitors flatlined. I was the one who slept in the recliner next to her bed for the last 2 weeks, who learned how to adjust the morphine pump from the hospice nurse, who read aloud from the same Nora Roberts novels Mom had read a dozen times because the sound of my voice seemed to calm her. I read about Irish castles and brave women with flowing hair and handsome blacksmiths, and I did all the voices, and sometimes my mom would open her eyes and say, "Keep going, sweetheart," and then drift back into the morphine haze. I ate vending machine crackers for dinner. I showered in the hospital bathroom with a tiny bar of soap that smelled like industrial cleaners. I held the bucket when she vomited, and I wiped her face with a cool cloth, and I told her it was okay to go, that I'd be fine, that Dad would be fine, that everything would be okay. It wasn't true, but she needed to hear it. Celeste visited twice. The first time she brought flowers from the grocery store, a mixed bouquet with the plastic wrap still on it and the price sticker on the bottom, $12.99. She stayed 20 minutes, took a phone call from a client on the other side of the room, and then said, "Mom, I have to go. This couple is flying in from Seattle to see the property and I can't reschedule." My mom, whose eyes were already glassy with pain, nodded and said, "Of course, honey, go make your sale." Celeste kissed her on the forehead, touched my shoulder like I was a piece of furniture on her way out, and left. The second time she arrived after Mom had already slipped into the final coma, the deep, unresponsive sleep where her breathing was shallow and her skin was cooling. She stood at the foot of the bed, scrolling through Instagram, and asked me if I'd thought about what to do with the house. The house our parents had owned for 30 years, the little split level in Milwaukee with the creaky porch swing and the hydrangeas Mom planted along the front walk, the house where I'd slept in the same narrow bedroom from kindergarten until I moved out at 19. Celeste wanted to list it. She already had comps pulled on her phone, a spreadsheet of square footages and price per square foot calculations and estimated net proceeds. She said, "Market's hot. We should get it on the MLS by next week so we don't miss the spring buyers. I've got a stager who owes me a favor." I said, "Mom isn't even dead yet." She shrugged, a small elegant lift of one shoulder, and said, "I'm just being practical. You know how the market is." I didn't even want the jewelry. I just wanted someone to notice she was gone. My Aunt Lorraine was the one person who saw me. She was my mom's older sister, 14 years older, which meant she'd been in her late 50s when I was a kid. She never married, lived alone in a 2-bedroom condo in the Alphabet District, the kind of brick low-rise with a courtyard fountain shaped like a lion's head and original hardwood floors that creaked in the winter. She was a retired librarian who drank Earl Grey and read 2 novels a week, and she treated me like I was interesting, not like I was a burden. When I was 10, she taught me how to use the microfiche machine at the downtown library, because I'd told her I wanted to be a detective when I grew up. I remember the way the machine whirred and clicked, the way the newspaper pages scrolled past in blurry gray stripes, and the way she leaned over my shoulder and said, "The key to research isn't just finding the answer, it's figuring out where to look." She smelled like old books and vanilla, a scent I still associate with safety. When I was 15 and Celeste was the star of the school play, The Sound of Music, in the role of Maria, naturally, Lorraine drove 2 hours from her weekend cabin in the Coast Range to watch my JV soccer game, the one where I sat on the bench the entire 90 minutes. And afterward, she took me out for pie at a diner off the highway and said, "Being on the bench doesn't mean you're not part of the team. It just means your moment hasn't come yet." She had a way of saying things that made you believe them. Not because they were comforting in a hollow motivational poster way, but because she'd thought them through and decided they were true, and she didn't say things she didn't believe. She made it clear, years before she got sick, that the condo was mine. She said, "Celeste married money, sweetheart. You need a roof that no one can take from you." She said it more than once, like she was planting a flag she wanted me to remember. The first time was at her 72nd birthday party, a small gathering at a tea house downtown, just me, her, and 2 of her librarian friends, women named Phyllis and Gwen who'd known her since the 1970s. Lorraine had a glass of champagne, which was unusual for her, and her voice got a little louder than normal. "Margaret, when I go, you get the condo. It's in my will. I've updated it. It's paid down to almost nothing. The HOA is reasonable, and you can live there forever. And no one, not your sister, not your father, not some future landlord trying to raise the rent, can make you leave. Do you understand me?" I told her to stop talking about dying. She said, "I'm not dying, I'm planning. There's a difference. Planning is what adults do." Then she asked the waiter for another slice of lemon cake and changed the subject. In 2021, Lorraine's heart gave out. She was 74. I was the one who found her, sitting in her recliner with a bookmark halfway through a Louise Penny novel, the tea still warm on the side table. The mug was a chipped ceramic one with a card catalog printed on the side, something she'd bought at a library conference in the 1990s. The tea was Earl Grey, 1 sugar, the way she always made it. I had a key to her place because I'd been stopping by every Sunday for the past 6 months, after she'd had a mild heart episode the previous winter, to do her grocery shopping, water her plants, and just sit with her while she talked about the books she'd read and the neighborhood gossip. That Sunday, I let myself in at 10 in the morning, called out her name, and heard nothing. I remember the way the light came through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long rectangles across the hardwood, the dust motes floating in the sunbeams. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. I touched her hand and it was cool. I called 911. I said words that I don't remember, and I sat on the floor next to the recliner, holding her hand, while the dispatcher told me to check for breathing that wasn't there. The paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. They were 2 men and a woman, kind and efficient, who moved around the apartment with a practiced gentleness. They said, "It looks like it was instant, probably in her sleep. She didn't suffer." I nodded like I understood. Then I walked outside, sat on the curb in the October drizzle, and sobbed until my ribs ached. I called Celeste. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I said, "Aunt Lorraine is dead." There was a pause, the kind of pause that isn't shock but calculation. And then she said, "Oh my God, did she leave a will? Not, are you okay? Not, how did it happen? Not, where are you, I'm coming right now. Did she leave a will?" I said yes, she left a will. Celeste said she'd be there in an hour. She showed up 62 minutes later, already on her phone with a staging consultant, asking whether the mid-century credenza in the living room was real teak or veneer. She walked through the apartment like a buyer at an open house, touching things, opening cabinets, peering into closets. The paramedics had covered Lorraine's body with a sheet, and the coroner hadn't arrived yet, and Celeste never once looked at the recliner. She just walked past it, cataloging the furniture. Looking back, there were signs I ignored. The way Celeste studied Lorraine's will like a contract to be renegotiated. The way she kept saying the condo was in a transitional neighborhood and I'd be better off selling. The way she insisted I give her a copy of the key for emergencies, just in case you get locked out or something. I gave her the key. I didn't think twice. At the reading of the will, which happened in a small conference room at a law office downtown, Celeste wore a navy blazer with gold buttons and took notes on a leather portfolio with a monogrammed C on the front, like she was at a closing. I wore jeans and a cardigan that had a small stain on the sleeve from where Gertrude, my future cat, would later drool on it. The lawyer, a woman in her 60s named MS. Patterson, who'd handled Lorraine's estate for decades, read the terms in a calm, practiced voice. The condo and its contents went to me, Margaret Ann Voss, outright and unencumbered. A separate investment account with about $32,000 in a mix of mutual funds was split evenly between us. And Celeste got Lorraine's 2015 Subaru Outback with 40,000 miles on it, a practical car that Lorraine had bought new and driven gently. When MS. Patterson read the condo part, Celeste's pen stopped moving. She looked up, her expression carefully neutral, and said, "The whole thing, just to Margaret, no stipulations." MS, Patterson said, "Yes, that's what the document states." MS. Voss made her intentions very clear. She revised the will in 2019 to reflect this transfer. Celeste closed her portfolio with a soft snap. She said, "Of course, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't a mistake. Margaret's not exactly experienced with homeownership. I mean, she's never even had a credit card with a decent limit. I'd hate to see her get in over her head." I said, "I've been paying rent for 12 years, Celeste. I think I can handle a mortgage." She smiled the way you smile at a child who says they want to be an astronaut, a smile that means, "That's adorable, but we both know it won't happen." Here's what that condo meant to me. It was a 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath unit on the 3rd floor of a quiet brick building on Northwest 23rd, a block from a coffee shop and a used bookstore called Paperback Dreams that had a resident cat who slept in the storefront window. The condo had floor-to-ceiling windows facing west, which meant the living room filled with golden light every evening, the kind of light that made the dust motes dance like something holy. There was a built-in bookshelf covering one entire wall, floor to ceiling, that Lorraine had filled with first-edition hardcovers she'd collected over a lifetime, inscribed copies from authors who'd come through Powell's books on tour, leather-bound volumes of poetry. A complete set of Jane Austen in a slipcase that smelled like vanilla and thyme. There was a small balcony overlooking the courtyard, just big enough for 2 chairs and a potted plant, where Lorraine had grown a catnip plant in a terracotta pot that the neighborhood cats would sometimes visit. The mortgage Lorraine had paid down to only $62,000 over 30 years of diligent payments. The monthly payment including HOA was $1,200. In Portland, in 2021, you couldn't rent a studio for that. The market value of the unit was $285,000, maybe more if the market kept climbing. I wasn't rich, but I was safe. For the first time in my adult life, I was safe. I moved in 3 weeks after the funeral. The building smelled like old brick and something floral, maybe from the courtyard garden. My unit, 3B, was at the end of a carpeted hallway with a brass light fixture shaped like a tulip. The door had a peephole and a deadbolt that Lorraine had installed in 2018 after a string of package thefts in the neighborhood. The bathroom tiles were tiny hexagons in pale pink and black, original from the 1950s, and the tub had claw feet and a shower attachment that leaked a little if you didn't tighten it all the way. Lorraine's furniture was still there. The mid-century credenza that turned out to be real teak, a velvet sofa in a deep emerald green that was soft in a way that suggested 40 years of careful use, a glass-topped coffee table with a hairline crack in one corner, from the time she dropped a heavy book on it in 1987, a dining table with 6 mismatched chairs she'd collected from estate sales over 4 decades. She'd left me a note in the top drawer of the credenza, written on her personal stationery, thick cream paper with a watermark. Dearest Margaret, this place was my sanctuary for 36 years. Now it's yours. The books are a collection of a lifetime, but don't feel obligated to keep the ones you won't read. The fern in the corner is named Phillies and she likes to be watered on Wednesdays. Be happy here. Love, Aunt Lorraine. I cried for 20 minutes, sitting on the emerald sofa with the letter pressed to my chest, my shoulders shaking. Then I watered Phillies. I painted the bedroom a soft sage green, the color of the Oregon forest in spring. A small act of claiming. I adopted a 12-year-old rescue cat named Gertrude from the Oregon Humane Society. Gertrude had 3 teeth, a chronic sinus condition that made her sneeze in little fits of 3, and a patch of fur missing on her left flank from an old burn injury that had healed badly. She was listed as special needs and had been at the shelter for 8 months because no one wanted a senior cat with recurring vet bills and a wheeze. I saw her photo on the website at 2 a.m. After a particularly brutal shift, a gray tabby with enormous green eyes and a grumpy expression, and I knew she was mine. She spent the first week hiding under the velvet sofa, her eyes glowing in the dark, but by the second week, she was sleeping on my pillow and drooling on my cardigan. The first mortgage payment I made, I set up an automatic transfer from my checking account on the first of every month. $1, $200, like clockwork. I got a receipt each time, a PDF I saved in a folder on my laptop called Home. I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a kid before I understood the family hierarchy, security. I was 31 years old and I had a home that couldn't be taken away. Or so I thought. In April 2022, I came home from a 16-hour shift, one of those nights where you lose 2 patients back-to-back and spend the last hour scrubbing blood out of your sneakers with a toothbrush and hydrogen peroxide in the staff bathroom. The first patient was a 7-year-old Labrador named Gus who'd eaten a sock that tangled in his intestines, and by the time his family brought him in, the damage was too severe, the tissue already necrotic. I held his paw while the vet administered the injection, and his owner, a man in his 60s named Frank who'd had Gus since he was a puppy, sobbed into my shoulder, his weight heavy and warm, his breath ragged. He said, "He was the best dog, he was the best dog," over and over, and I said, "Yes, he was, because that's what you say." The second patient was a stray kitten someone had found in a box on the side of Highway 26, barely 5 weeks old, hypothermic and fading. She was a tiny tortoiseshell, her fur matted with fleas, her eyes still blue. We warmed her with blankets and a heating pad. We gave her subcutaneous fluids and Caro syrup on her gums, but she was too far gone, too malnourished, too small, and she died in my hands at 4:45 a.m., her tiny body going slack, her mouth opening in a silent meow that never came. I wrote both their names in the logbook we keep for difficult cases, a spiral notebook hidden in a drawer behind the reception desk. The ritual was started by a vet named Dr. Kapoor years ago, a small act of witness. I wrote, Gus, yellow lab, 7 years old, Frank's best friend. Kitten, tortoiseshell, no name, found on the highway. Then I closed the notebook and put it back. I walked to my car in the gray dawn, my scrub stiff with dried saline and antiseptic, My back a solid knot of pain from bending over exam tables for 16 hours, my brain foggy with exhaustion and grief. The drive home took 20 minutes, through the light early morning traffic, past the food trucks, and the shut-up boutiques on Burnside. I parked in my assigned spot in the underground garage, space number 17, which had a little sign that said 3B, that Lorraine had made with a label maker in 2015, the letters slightly crooked because she'd never quite mastered the alignment. I trudged up the stairs because the elevator was slow and I couldn't stand the thought of standing still in a metal box. And when I reached the third-floor landing, I saw a piece of paper taped to my front door. It was handwritten on floral stationery, the kind you'd use for a baby shower invitation, pink and green watercolor flowers at the border, the paper slightly damp from the hallway humidity. The handwriting was Celeste's careful cursive, the one she'd practiced for hours in high school with a workbook and a fountain pen, the loops perfect, the slant consistent. Dear tenants, please be advised that as the legal owner of this property, I am exercising my right to occupy Unit 3B effective June 1, 2022. Your lease is terminated. Please vacate by May 31. Contact Celeste Harmon at 503-555-0147 with questions. I stared at the note for a full minute, my brain short-circuiting, my body a statue in the hallway. I read it 3 times, the words rearranging themselves into nonsense. Legal owner, terminated lease. Vacate. I didn't have a lease, I owned this condo. I had the deed, a thick document with a gold seal that MS Patterson had given me at the reading of the will. I had the paperwork from the estate. I had Aunt Lorraine's note in the credenza drawer. I had made every mortgage payment on time, 12 payments so far, $14,400 that had left my checking account and gone straight to the bank, and I had the receipts to prove it. I unlocked the door with shaking hands, dropping my keys twice, the metallic clatter echoing in the empty hallway. Inside, Gertrude was asleep on the emerald sofa, a patch of drool already forming on the velvet. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it, the fern in the corner, the books on the shelves, the sage green bedroom walls. But it felt wrong, like someone had rearranged the molecules while I was gone. I sat on the edge of the sofa, picked up my phone, and called Celeste. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright and professional, the voice she used for open houses and PTA meetings and closing negotiations, a voice that said, "I am in control and you are lucky to have my attention." "Margaret, hi, I was wondering when you'd call." I said, "What the hell is this, Celeste? What do you mean legal owner? This is my condo. Aunt Lorraine left it to me. You know that. You were at the reading. You heard MS Patterson." She let out a small, patient sigh, the kind you give a child who doesn't understand fractions. "Actually, you signed a quitclaim deed transferring ownership to me back in January. You don't remember. You said you were overwhelmed with the mortgage and the upkeep and you wanted out. We talked about it over coffee, remember? At that little place on Hawthorne, the one with the mismatched chairs. You said it was too much pressure and you wanted to go back to renting. I agreed to take it over as a favor to you. The documents are all recorded with the county. I'm the official owner now. I'm sorry if you forgot, but it's done." I said, "I didn't sign anything. Celeste, I have never signed anything. I have never missed a payment. I have never said I wanted out. I don't even drink coffee with you. We don't go to coffee shops. That never happened. What are you talking about?" She said, "Margaret, I know you've been under a lot of stress with work and everything. The overnight shifts, the animal deaths, it takes a toll. It's okay. I'm not mad. But the condo is mine now, and I need you to vacate by the end of May so I can move forward with some plans for the property. I've already got tenants lined up, a lovely couple from California, Brent and Tessa. They're paying $3,200 a month, which is a great rate for the neighborhood. I'll send you the paperwork if you need to see it again. Just take care of yourself, okay? We can talk more later." And she hung up. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the silence where my sister's voice had been, the dial tone eventually starting because I didn't move. My hands were cold. My face was hot. I felt a kind of vertigo, a sensation that the floor wasn't quite solid, that gravity had tilted sideways. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I opened my laptop, logged into the coffee shop Wi-Fi because the condo internet was in my name, and pulled up the Multnomah County Property Records website. My building's address, Unit 3B. The page loaded slowly, the little wheels spinning, and then there it was. Quitclaim deed, dated January 12, 2022, recorded on January 14, 2022, transferring title from Margaret Ann Voss to Celeste Marie Harmon. The document number was 2022-004587. The consideration was listed as love and affection. Not a single dollar, just love and affection. I clicked on the scanned image of the deed, a grayscale PDF that loaded slowly, line by line. There was my name printed in block capitals, Margaret Ann Voss, and below it a signature in cursive that tried to look like mine, Margaret Ann Voss. The M had a similar loop. The T in Margaret had a little cross, but the pressure was wrong. The strokes were too even, too careful. My real signature is sloppy, rushed, the product of years of signing medical charts at a busy animal hospital where you're holding a folder open with your elbow and a dog is barking in the next room and you have about 8 seconds to scribble your name. This signature looked like someone had traced it slowly, deliberately, over and over, until it was almost right. Celeste had spent 36 years studying my handwriting on birthday cards and shared chore charts and notes left on the kitchen counter. She could have practiced for weeks. She'd always been good at art, at precise hand movements. She used to make fun of my messy handwriting at the dinner table, holding up my school papers and saying, "Margaret, are you a doctor? Because I can't read a word of this." And my parents would laugh. And now that exact messiness, the thing she'd mocked, was the thing she'd tried to forge. And the notary stamp was there, a raised seal that appeared as a dark smudge on the scan, and below it a signature. Patricia Kowalski, Notary Public, State of Oregon, Commission number 9,876,543. My commission expires June 30, 2025. The notary had allegedly witnessed me sign this document, in person, on January 12, 2022. But I had never been in a room with a notary. I had never seen this paper before. I had never agreed to anything. I refreshed the page 3 times, hoping it was a glitch, a database error, a bad dream. It wasn't. I called the county recorder's office the next morning as soon as they opened at 8 a.m. After a sleepless night of pacing the hardwood floors, Gertrude watching me with worried eyes. The woman on the phone, a clerk named Missy, who sounded like she'd been dealing with distressed property owners for 20 years, was sympathetic but firm. "Ma'am, if the document was properly notarized and recorded, it's a legal instrument. We can't just remove it from the record because you say it's forged. You'll need to challenge it in court. You need a judge to issue a quiet title order." I asked her if there was a faster way, an administrative review, anything. She said, "No, ma'am, it's a civil matter now. I'm sorry." I called the Portland Police Bureau next, and they forwarded me to the fraud division, and I left a message on a voicemail that was full. I called back 3 times before someone picked up. The officer who eventually took my report, a detective named Ruiz, agreed to meet with me in person at the precinct on East Burnside. I brought the note from my door, a printout of the deed, my actual driver's license, my mortgage statements for the past year, the paperwork from the estate, even the handwritten letter from Lorraine, like a desperate collage of evidence that proved my life was real. Detective Ruiz was a tired-looking man in his 40s with a graying mustache and a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Cop." He listened quietly while I explained, taking notes in a small spiral notebook with a golf pencil. He asked me questions. Did Celeste have access to my personal documents? Yes, she'd been in my apartment. She had a key. Did I have any witnesses who could verify my whereabouts on January 12? I checked my phone. I worked a 12-hour shift that day, 7:58 a.m. to 8:17 p.m. with time-stamped medical records. Did I have any text messages or emails from Celeste about the condo? Only the voicemails saying I should sell. He nodded, closed his notebook, and said, "Miss Voss, I believe you. This sounds like textbook fraud, but here's the problem. It's a family member, the document is notarized by a real notary, and the dollar amount is substantial but not in the fraud division's high-priority threshold, which is typically over $1 million. The district attorney's office is likely to see this as a civil matter unless we can prove criminal intent beyond any doubt right now. And we don't have the resources for a full forensic investigation on a case like this unless there's a pattern or the loss is catastrophic. I'll write a report, but I'm telling you honestly, it's going to sit on a desk. Get a lawyer. This is going to be a mess in court." He gave me a copy of the report, a single sheet of paper with a case number, and I walked out of the precinct feeling like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I called a lawyer the next day, a woman recommended by a coworker whose cousin had gone through a messy divorce that involved a disputed vacation house. Her name was Janine Cross, an attorney with an office on the 8th floor of a building downtown, with a view of Mount Hood if you stood at the window. The consultation cost $250 for an hour, which I paid from my emergency savings. The savings I'd been building since I was 19, $5 here, $10 there. Skipping coffee and bringing lunches of peanut butter sandwiches to work, canceling subscriptions, never buying new clothes. The savings account that was supposed to be for a new car someday, or a medical emergency, or a trip to somewhere I'd always wanted to go, not for a lawyer to tell me my sister had legally stolen my home. Janine was competent but not optimistic. She was a thin woman in a gray suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her glasses on a chain. She flipped through my documents with quick, efficient movements and then set them down and folded her hands. Margaret, you have a case, legally speaking. Quiet title actions based on forgery are winnable. But against a family member with a notarized deed that appears valid on its face, it's complicated. It could take 2-3 years of litigation. Discovery, depositions, a handwriting expert, a forensic document examiner, notary records. You're looking at $30,000, $40,000 in legal fees minimum. And even if you win, collecting a money judgment from a family member is its own special nightmare. You can't get blood from a stone, and if she spends the money or hides the equity, you might win a judgment you'll never collect. I need you to be realistic about the cost-benefit here. I said, the condo is worth $285,000. She said, you might spend $300,000 trying to get it back. And the whole time you'll be paying the mortgage, paying me, and Celeste will be doing whatever she wants with the property. I'm sorry. Think about it. I walked out of that office and sat in my Civic in the parking garage, the engine off, the air stale and warm, and I screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw, and then I drove home. And then, to add the kind of cruelty that still makes my throat tighten when I think about it, Celeste rented it out. From the moment the deed was recorded, she leased my condo to a couple from California, Brent and Tessa, who were relocating for a tech job in the Pearl District and had found the listing on Zillow, a listing Celeste had posted with professional photos taken by her staging consultant. The listing described the unit as a charming vintage gem in the heart of the Alphabet District, with original hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a private balcony overlooking a tranquil courtyard fountain. It mentioned the built-in bookshelves and the character-rich bathroom. It did not mention that the person who had lovingly maintained this home for 36 years had just died, that her niece had been living there, that the whole thing was a theft. Brent and Tessa signed an 18-month lease at $3,200 a month. They moved in on June 1, 2022, the day after the notice on my door said I had to vacate. I know this because I drove by that day, after dragging my belongings in garbage bags and cardboard boxes into a storage unit at a facility on Powell Boulevard that cost $85 a month, and I saw a moving truck in the loading zone, a big yellow Penske truck with California plates. I saw Brent, a tall guy in a baseball cap and a Portland Trail Blazers t-shirt, carrying a flat-screen TV up the front steps with the help of a friend. I saw Tessa, a pretty woman with a blonde ponytail and a sundress, standing on the balcony, hanging a set of bamboo wind chimes from the railing. The wind chimes clinked in the June breeze, a soft, hollow sound that carried across the street. I sat in my Civic with the engine off, the windows down, and I watched strangers move into my home. I didn't confront them. What would I say? They had a valid lease signed by the recorded owner, a lease they'd probably signed with excitement, a new chapter in their lives, a move from California to the quirky charm of Portland. They had no idea who I was. They were innocent. A part of me wanted to march up there and tell them the truth, but I knew it would only scare them and make me look unhinged. So I sat and I watched and I cataloged the things they brought inside. A Peloton bike, a mid-century modern lamp, a crate of vinyl records, a cat carrier with a sleepy orange tabby visible through the mesh. A cat. They had a cat. In my home. Here's the financial mechanism Celeste set up, and this is the part that still makes my stomach twist when I think about it, because it was so premeditated, so surgical, so much more clever than I ever gave her credit for. She didn't assume the mortgage. She didn't refinance. She didn't contact the bank at all. The mortgage remained in my name, attached to my bank account, drafting automatically on the 1st of every month. All she did was transfer the title, a single piece of paper filed with the county for a recording fee of $54. So I was legally obligated to pay the bank $1.200 a month for a property I no longer owned, could not access, could not live in, while she collected $3.200 a month in rent from tenants she'd placed in a property she'd acquired through forgery. Net profit to her, after my mortgage payment was factored in, $2,000 a month, pure. Over the 18-month lease term, that's $36,000 in gross profit, plus the equity I was still building with my payments, plus the property itself. And she spent every dime. She spent it on a family trip to Disney World in August 2022, a 5-day vacation with park hopper passes, and a stay at the Polynesian Village Resort in a theme park view room that cost $9,200 according to her bank records. There are photos on her Instagram of her kids, Lily and Ben, wearing Mickey ears and holding giant lollipops, their faces painted with glitter, both of them beaming with the uncomplicated joy of children who have no idea their vacation was funded by fraud. She spent it on a new Subaru Outback, a 2023 model in dark blue with leather seats and a sunroof, to replace the one Lorraine had left her, which she traded in. She spent it on a backyard renovation in Lake Oswego, a $15,300 project that added a fire pit, a cedar pergola, and a built-in grill station with a mini-fridge, the kind you see in home and garden magazines, which she then posted about on Instagram with the caption, "Summer evenings just got an upgrade." She spent it on a new living room set from a boutique furniture store in the Pearl District, a sofa and 2 armchairs and a beige linen that cost $4,750, the color of expensive neutrality. I know all this because I later subpoenaed her bank records, but at the time I only knew that my mortgage kept being drafted, and my sister kept cashing rent checks, and my life kept falling apart. I couldn't evict Brent and Tessa. I looked into it obsessively, staying up late reading Oregon landlord-tenant law on a laptop that was slowly dying, its battery holding a charge for maybe 40 minutes. In Oregon, a tenant with a lease signed by the recorded owner has the right to occupy the property, even if the ownership is disputed, until a court says otherwise. If I'd tried to change the locks or enter the unit, I'd be trespassing, and they could call the police on me, and I'd be arrested, which is a wild thing to think about, being arrested for entering your own home. I consulted the Oregon State Bar's Tenant Rights Hotline, a free service where a volunteer attorney calls you back within a week. The attorney, a young-sounding man named Evan, listened to my story and said, "Honestly, the law protects the tenants here. They're innocent third parties. Your fight is with your sister, not with them. If you harass them or try to break the lease, you'll be liable for their damages, and you'll look terrible in court. Document everything and please find a good lawyer." So I was homeless, effectively. I couch-surfed for a few weeks, staying with a series of friends who were generous but had their own lives, their own cramped apartments, their own partners and children and routines I interrupted. My friend Eliza, a vet tech at a different clinic, let me sleep on her pull-out couch for 10 days, but the couch was in her living room, which was also her toddler's playroom, and every morning I'd wake up at 6 a.m. to a small child staring at me from 6 inches away, asking if I wanted to see her rock collection. I said yes every time, because she was 3 and didn't understand anything, but my nerves were shredded. Then I crashed with an old college friend named Simone who lived in a studio in Goose Hollow, which meant I slept on an air mattress that deflated slowly every night, so by 4 a.m. I was on the floor. Then I found the Ferret apartment. I moved in with a roommate I found on Craigslist, a woman in her late 40s named Donna who lived in a 2-bedroom on 82nd Avenue near the Banfield Freeway, a wedge of a building sandwiched between a 7-Eleven and a check cashing place. The rent was $600 a month, which was all I could afford after the mortgage and the storage unit and the gas and the cat food. Donna was a former massage therapist who now worked at a call center for a health insurance company, a job she hated, which you could hear in her voice when she came home at 6 p.m., and poured herself a glass of boxed wine and watched property reality shows on the ancient television in the living room. She kept ferrets, 4 of them. She'd had ferrets for 20 years, she told me, a rotating cast of slender, sinuous creatures with glossy fur and tiny, sharp teeth, and a musky scent that she swore was virtually eliminated by the dissenting surgery. But I am here to tell you that whatever that surgery removed, it didn't remove enough. The ferrets were named Bandit, Slinky, Mischief, and Tinkerbell. Bandit was the alpha, a pale sable-colored creature who liked to steal socks and hide them behind the refrigerator. Slinky was profoundly lazy and slept 16 hours a day in a fleece hammock in their multi-level ferret cage. Mischief lived up to her name and once escaped the apartment entirely by squeezing through a gap in the back door, which led to a 2-hour neighborhood search that ended when a neighbor found her in his garage, curled up in a box of old paint cans. Tinkerbell was the smallest and the most affectionate, which meant she liked to climb up my pant leg while I was trying to eat dinner. They had free run of the apartment during the day, which meant they burrowed into any fabric they could find, stashing small objects like socks and keys, and once, my toothbrush, which I found 3 days later in a nest of dryer lint behind the couch. The apartment smelled like ferret musk and cedar bedding and something slightly ammonia adjacent, a smell that clings to your hair, your clothes, your sheets, your skin, your breath. I could shower 3 times a day and still catch a whiff of it on my wrists when I pulled on my scrubs. I slept on a futon in the spare room, which Donna had advertised on Craigslist as furnished private bedroom. The furnished part consisted of a futon with a bent metal frame that sagged in the middle like a hammock, a lamp without a shade that threw a harsh 60-watt glare on everything, and a dresser missing 2 drawers, the remaining drawer full of what appeared to be old ferret food pellets. The window faced the Banfield, so all night I heard the hum of traffic and the occasional blare of a horn and the rumble of trucks downshifting. The walls were thin enough that I could hear Donna's phone conversations with her boyfriend, a guy named Steve who she fought with regularly about his ex-wife. I paid $600 a month to live in a ferret habitat and sleep on a broken futon while my sister cashed $200 checks from my condo and paid exactly nothing toward the mortgage I was still funding. I kept paying the mortgage. I had to. If I defaulted, the bank would foreclose on the condo, and that foreclosure would appear on my credit report like a black mark, tanking my score from the 740 I'd painstakingly built over a decade to something in the low 500s. I wouldn't be able to rent a decent apartment. I wouldn't be able to finance a car if mine died. I'd be locked out of every financial safety net I might ever need. So every month, on the first, I watched $200 leave my checking account with a small electronic chime, and I recalculated my budget in a Google sheet that I updated obsessively, cutting everything that wasn't strictly necessary. I stopped buying coffee. I made instant at home with a kettle that tasted like metal. I ate oatmeal for breakfast, the generic kind that comes in a big cardboard cylinder, plain with a sprinkle of sugar. Lunch was a peanut butter sandwich on the cheapest bread I could find, or sometimes just a sleeve of saltine crackers from the clinic break room. Dinner was whatever was left in the break room fridge at the end of a shift, cold pizza from a pharmaceutical rep's lunch, someone's abandoned Tupperware of spaghetti, a banana that was going brown. I sold my bicycle on Craigslist for $200. I canceled my Netflix subscription. I downgraded my phone plan to the absolute minimum. I patched holes in my only pair of sneakers with duct tape, black tape on black fabric, and hoped no one looked too closely. I stopped getting haircuts. I let my eyebrows grow into a single suggestion of a unibrow. I stopped buying anything that wasn't food or gas or the mortgage. I lost 11 pounds in 6 weeks, not because I was trying, but because I was surviving on something like 200 calories a day and sleeping 4 hours a night on a futon that felt like a bag of rocks. My scrubs hung on me. My cheekbones sharpened. My coworkers, who were kind people who worked with dying animals, started giving me sideways looks. No one said anything directly. In an animal hospital, everyone is in some state of personal crisis. It's part of the job. But I could feel their eyes. My cat Gertrude, who I'd taken with me to Donna's apartment in her carrier, with her favorite fleece blanket and her kibble that cost $30 a bag, started peeing outside her litter box. First it was a puddle on the bathroom floor, then on my futon, then on a pile of laundry I'd left in the corner because I was too exhausted to carry it to the laundromat. Cat pee, for those who don't know, is one of the most stubborn smells in the world, an ammonia bomb that soaks into fabric and wood and concrete and never really leaves. I rented a carpet cleaner from the grocery store for $30, and spent a Saturday scrubbing the floor of my room. But the smell lingered, mixing with the ferret musk to create a scent that I still, to this day, cannot encounter without feeling a wave of despair. I took Gertrude to the vet at my clinic, the same clinic where I worked, and Dr. Kapoor, the same vet who'd started the difficult cases logbook, diagnosed her with a stress-induced urinary tract infection. "Cats are sensitive to environmental changes," she said, looking at me with a gentleness that made my eyes sting. "The move, the ferrets, you know, all of it. She's picking up on your stress, Margaret. You need to take care of yourself, too." The treatment cost $340, which I put on a credit card with a 22% interest rate because I didn't have the cash, and then I paid the minimum payment every month, watching the balance slowly grow, the interest compounding like a joke I wasn't in on. I called Celeste every few weeks at first, hoping she'd relent, hoping it was a misunderstanding, hoping the sister who'd taught me how to braid my hair in the bathtub when we were kids, who'd let me sleep in her bed when I had nightmares, who'd made me a birthday card with a hand-drawn unicorn that I still had in a shoebox somewhere, was still in there somewhere. The first few times, she answered. She said things like, "I'll look into it," or "I'm waiting to hear back from my attorney," or "You're being so dramatic, Margaret, it's just a piece of paper, we'll sort it out eventually." Then she started screening my calls. I'd leave voicemails, long rambling messages that I'm embarrassed to remember, my voice cracking, my words tumbling over each other. "Celeste, it's me, please call me back, I can't sleep. I can't eat, I'm living with ferrets, please. I don't understand why you're doing this." She never returned them. I'd send texts, long, careful messages explaining the financial and emotional toll, and she'd reply with a single word. "K," or nothing. One night after a shift where I'd held a 14-year-old Springer Spaniel named Daisy as she died, and then had to clean up a kennel of bloody diarrhea from a parvo puppy, I sent her a text that said, "Celeste, please. I'm sleeping on a futon. I can't afford food. I'm paying your mortgage. Just give me back the condo. I'll forgive you. I won't press charges. I won't go to the cops. Just please give it back. I'm begging you." She replied 2 hours later, "The condo is mine legally. If you keep harassing me, I'll get a restraining order. Stop texting me." Harassing, I was harassing her. I called our father, because some part of me still believed he would see what was happening and intervene, the way fathers are supposed to intervene when one of their children is destroying another. My father, a retired electrician who lived in a small house in Milwaukee, with a yellow lab named Buster and a refrigerator full of Miller Lite, was the kind of man who avoided conflict by ignoring it entirely. He'd let Celeste dominate every family gathering, every Thanksgiving conversation, every major decision because it was easier than standing up to her. Standing up to Celeste meant a fight, and my father didn't fight. He just went quiet. When I told him in very simple terms that Celeste had forged my signature and stolen my home, he was quiet for a long moment. I heard him breathing, the wheeze of his mild emphysema. Then he said, "Girls, please. Your mother wouldn't want this. She would want you to get along." I said, "Dad, she committed fraud, a felony. She's stealing from me right now. I'm living in a ferret apartment and she took my condo and she's cashing rent checks every month." He said, "I know, but she's your sister. Families don't sue each other, Margaret. That's not how we do things. Maybe you can just talk to her. Maybe you can work out a deal. Maybe she'll pay you some of the rent money, a little bit every month until you get back on your feet." I said, "She's collecting $3,200 a month and I'm paying $1,200. What deal would I possibly work out? She's not offering a deal. She says she's the legal owner and I'm harassing her." He said, "I'm sure she has her reasons. Celeste always has a plan. She's a very organized person. Maybe she did it for tax purposes. Have you thought of that?" Tax purposes. That was the moment I realized my father would never pick my side. Not because he didn't love me, but because picking my side would mean admitting that his golden child, the daughter he'd bragged about at the Union Hall, the one with the law school boyfriend and the vineyard wedding and the 5-bedroom colonial, was a criminal, and that was a truth he couldn't hold in his hands. So he did what he'd always done. He ducked his head, he smoothed things over, he told himself a story where his daughters would hug it out and everything would go back to normal. My normal was a futon and ferrets and duct tape on my shoes. I stopped eating lunch in the break room because I couldn't stomach the pitying looks from my coworkers, who knew I was in trouble but didn't know the details. The break room was a small windowless room with a microwave that smelled like burnt popcorn and a fridge full of unlabeled Tupperware. There was a whiteboard where people wrote motivational quotes. You are making a difference. Hang in there. Remember to drink water. I started avoiding it entirely, bringing my own food to my car and eating in the parking garage, or eating nothing and telling people I'd had a big breakfast. The receptionist, a kind woman named Janelle who'd worked the front desk for 11 years, pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Honey, are you eating enough? You look like you're wasting away. Your scrubs are hanging off you." I told her I was fine, just stressed, a lot going on. She didn't believe me, and the next day she brought an extra Tupperware of spaghetti and meatballs and left it on my locker with a Post-it note that said, "Eat this or I'm telling HR you're not taking breaks. Love, Janelle." I ate it in the supply closet, sitting on a case of Roman IV fluids, crying into a plate of cold pasta, because someone noticed, and that made it worse somehow. Because the person who noticed was a coworker I barely knew outside of shift changes, and the person who should have noticed, my sister, was posting Instagram stories of her new fire pit and roasting marshmallows with her kids, her caption, "Making memories in our backyard oasis." The months blurred in that way they do when you're in survival mode, each day a replica of the day before. Summer 2022 bled into fall, the leaves turning in the Northwest Hills, the rain returning after a brief dry season. Fall into winter, the gray Portland winter that settles over the city like a wet wool blanket, the days short, the sun setting at 4:30 p.m., the streetlights glowing orange through the mist. I worked my shifts, I fed Gertrude, I slept on the futon. I drove past the condo on my days off, a compulsion I couldn't stop, like pressing a bruise to see if it still hurt. The California tenants had made it their own. The wind chimes were still there, acquiring a green patina of moss in the damp air. A potted fern replaced the catnip plant on the balcony, a fern that I later learned was named Philly's JR. Because Tessa had a thing about naming plants, a detail I'd discover from her Instagram, which I found one night at 3 a.m. during a particularly self-destructive scroll. Tessa's Instagram was public, full of photos of her cat, the orange tabby named Motshai, lounging in various sunbeams, and her morning coffee art, and the view from the balcony with hashtags like #PortlandLife and #Condoliving and #Grateful. There was a photo of their living room, my living room, with the bamboo blinds they'd installed, the emerald sofa still there, but now draped with a beige throw blanket, the bookshelves still full of Lorraine's first editions, but now with a few of their own books mixed in, a guide to Oregon hiking trails and a cookbook about sourdough. There was a photo of Tessa sitting on the balcony, the wind chimes visible behind her, with a caption, "Morning meditation in our little slice of Portland heaven." I stared at that photo for a long time. She looked happy. She looked peaceful. She had no idea. Once I saw Brent bring in a pizza delivery from Escape from New York, the same pizza place on Northwest 21st that Lorraine and I used to order from on Friday nights. I remembered sitting at the mismatched dining table with her, eating slices off chipped plates, while she told me stories about her travels in Europe in the 1970s, hitchhiking through France and Italy with a backpack and a library card. "Libraries will let you use the bathroom anywhere in the world," she said. "If you're ever lost, find a library. The librarians will help you." I sat in my car and watched Brent carry the pizza box up the steps, and I could almost taste the pepperoni and the slightly sweet sauce, and I cried, silently, the tears dripping onto my scrubs. By August 2023, 16 months into the arrangement, I had paid $19, $200 toward the mortgage. Celeste had collected roughly $51, $200 in rent, netting around $32,000 in profit after my mortgage payments. I knew this from periodic checks on the county property website, which still showed her as the owner, and from the rent checks I later saw in her bank records, but at the time I made the calculations in my head over and over, a grim arithmetic that I couldn't stop. I developed a ritual. Every first of the month, when the mortgage payment left my account, I'd write Celeste a text. Not a pleading text anymore, but a factual one, almost clinical. Month 14, $1, $200 paid. You've now collected $16, $800 in mortgage payments from me while pocketing $44, $800 in rent. I hope the fire pit is warm. Or, Happy November, another $1, $200. That brings your profit to over $34,000. I'm eating saltines for dinner. What are you having? She rarely replied. When she did, it was always some variation of deflection. Stop contacting me, Margaret, or I'll block your number. One time she wrote, "You should be thanking me. The value of the condo has gone up to $310,000 according to the latest comps. I did you a favor by managing the asset. You'd never have been able to handle it on your own. You can't even keep a roommate. Thanking her. I was supposed to thank her. Rock bottom, the real bottom, the one I measure every other low point against, came in September 2023. I just finished my third overnight shift in a row, a stretch the hospital only allowed in emergencies, but we were desperately short-staffed, and I'd volunteered for the extra hours because the overtime pay was the only thing keeping me from going underwater. 72 hours with short naps in the break room on a vinyl couch that was older than I was, surrounded by the constant beeping of monitors, and the metallic smell of surgical prep, and the sound of dogs crying in their kennels. I'd assisted on 2 emergency surgeries, a splenectomy on a greyhound named Thunder who bled so much I had to change my scrubs twice, and a foreign body removal on a 4-month-old Labrador puppy who'd eaten a corn cob hole. Both animals survived, which was a win, but I was so tired I felt drunk, my eyes gritty, my hands trembling, my thoughts moving through molasses. I left the clinic at 8 a.m. On a Tuesday, the September sunlight harsh and accusatory after the fluorescent gloom of the hospital. Instead of driving to the ferret apartment, I drove to the condo. I don't know why. My body just turned the wheel that way, muscle memory, or maybe self-immolation. I parked across the street in a 2-hour zone, turned off the engine, and just looked. It was a beautiful morning, the sky a soft blue, the trees on Northwest 23rd just starting to shift into gold and orange. The building looked the same as it always had, red brick and black iron balconies, the lion fountain still gurgling in the courtyard below, its mouth open in a permanent silent roar. And on my balcony, the balcony of Unit 3B, there was a new addition, a cat hammock. One of those suction cup window beds that attaches to the glass, a curved piece of plastic with a fleece liner. There was a cat in it, the orange tabby Machai, stretched out in the sun with his tail flicking lazily, his eyes half closed, a picture of perfect contentment. And next to the cat hammock, Tessa, the tenant, was standing on the balcony, watering the fern with a little blue watering can, and humming something I couldn't hear through the glass. The wind chimes clinked. A breeze ruffled her hair. She looked exactly like a person who had no idea she was living in a stolen home. I sat there and I sobbed. I sobbed so hard I couldn't get air, my chest heaving, my vision blurring spots. I grabbed the empty McDonald's cup from the passenger seat, the one from the breakfast I'd bought with the last $3 in my wallet, and I threw up into it, a thin yellow bile because there was nothing in my stomach but coffee and the cumulative acid of 18 months of despair. I sat in my Civic with a cup of vomit in my hand and tears on my scrubs, and I thought, this is it. This is the rest of my life. My sister stole $285,000 and I'm throwing up in a McDonald's cup across the street from my own home and no one is coming to save me. Then my phone buzzed, a text from my dad. Celeste and Derek are hosting Thanksgiving this year. I hope you'll come. She says she misses you and wants to put all this behind us. It would mean a lot to me. I stared at the words. She misses me. She wants to put it behind us. I replied. She stole my home, Dad. She's renting it to strangers and I'm living with ferrets and paying the mortgage. He wrote back, she's your sister. Family is forever. Please think about it. That was the moment something inside me calcified. It wasn't a dramatic shift, no swelling orchestral music or lightning bolt of clarity. It was more like a switch flipping from maybe this can be fixed to fixing this is a project now. The grief and the fury were still there, but they stopped being a swamp I was drowning in and became a fuel I could burn. I stopped crying. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. I pulled the vomit cup into a plastic bag from the footwell, tied it off, and put it on the passenger side floor. I drove to the ferret apartment, took the longest, hottest shower of my life, and sat on the broken futon with my laptop, the ferrets scrabbling in the next room, Gertrude curled on my feet, her wheezing breaths a familiar rhythm. I typed into Google, Oregon property fraud statute of limitations, and quiet title action forgery, and punitive damages fraud real estate Oregon, and legal aid title fraud Portland. And then I found the thing that changed everything, a link to a legal aid clinic at Lewis and Clark Law School, the Community Property Rights Project, which offered pro bono representation for low-income individuals facing title fraud and predatory real estate practices. The website was simple, a blue banner with the law school's logo, and a description of services. We prioritize cases involving forgery, elder financial abuse, and familial property theft. Intake forms are reviewed on a rolling basis. I clicked the intake form link, and a long questionnaire opened, field after field asking for details. The property address, the nature of the fraud, the parties involved, the financial impact, any supporting documentation. I typed 17 single-spaced paragraphs. I wrote about Lorraine, about the will, about the note on my door, about the deed, about the mortgage payments, about the ferrets, about the cat hammock, about the McDonald's cup. I didn't spare any detail. I wept while I typed, the tears dripping onto the keyboard, but I didn't stop. I attached the county deed record, the police report from Detective Ruiz, my last 12 mortgage statements, the photo of Celeste's note on my door, a screenshot of Tessa's Instagram with the cat hammock, everything. I hit submit at 2:17 a.m. Pacific time, and then I fell asleep sitting up, the laptop still open on my chest, Gertrude's head tucked under my chin. The clinic called me 3 days later. I was at work in the break room, actually sitting down with a cup of soup from the vending machine, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A law student named Aisha, who sounded about 23 and profoundly confident, said, "Miss Voss, I'm calling from the Community Property Rights Project at Lewis and Clark. I've read your intake form, and your case is the most egregious example of familial title fraud I've seen in our clinic. Professor Hargrove personally asked me to call you. She wants to meet you in person. Can you come on Friday at 2 p.m.? I said yes before she finished the sentence. Next Friday, I took a half-day off work, using precious PTO, and drove to the law school campus on the south side of the river, a cluster of modern glass buildings and old brick halls. The clinic was in a basement space with fluorescent lights and file cabinets and a whiteboard covered in legal diagrams. I sat in a small conference room with a recyclable cup of terrible coffee and told my story to Professor Elaine Hargrove. She was a small woman in her 60s, with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and a piercing stare that made you feel like she was scanning your soul for inconsistencies. She wore a navy blazer with the law school's crest on the pocket, and she listened without interrupting, her glasses perched on her nose. When I finished, she set her glasses down and said, "Miss Voss, what your sister did is not just fraud. It's felony forgery under Oregon Revised Statute 165-013. It's grand larceny, it's a violation of the Oregon Unlawful Trade Practices Act, and it's the kind of case that makes me want to teach a whole semester on just this one fact pattern. You don't just have a case, you have a missile. I want to help you file it. Are you ready to go to war?" I said, "Professor Hargrove, I live in a ferret apartment and I just threw up in a McDonald's cup. I am very, very ready to go to war." So began the rebuild. The clinic took my case on a pro bono basis, with Professor Hargrove as the supervising attorney and Aisha as the lead student, supported by 2 other law students, a young man named Derek, different Derek, and a woman named Priya. They called the case Voss v. Harmon, and it became a teaching case for the entire property law clinic. The first thing I did on Professor Hargrove's advice was enroll in a paralegal certificate program at Portland Community College, the accelerated online track, 6 months. I did this for 2 reasons. One, I wanted to understand the legal system I was about to navigate, not just rely on lawyers. I wanted to read the motions, the briefs, the discovery requests, and actually understand them. 2, I wanted a career that would let me help people who were in my position, people who got bulldozed by their families and banks and didn't know where to start, didn't even know there was a place to start. The program cost $3,950, which I scraped together by selling everything I owned that wasn't essential, and a few things that were. My childhood violin, which had been sitting in a case under my bed for 15 years, sold to a music store on Hawthorne for $300. A collection of antique teacups Lorraine had given me on various birthdays, delicate porcelain with hand-painted flowers, sold on eBay for $140. My bike, already sold. My one nice dress, a black sheath I'd worn to funerals and job interviews, sold on Poshmark for $45. I borrowed $2,000 from a credit union with an interest rate of 14% that made me flinch, but I didn't care. I worked my overnight shifts, came home to Donna's ferret circus, and studied. I learned the federal rules of civil procedure, the Oregon rules of civil procedure, the rules of evidence, the hearsay exceptions, the standards for proving fraud under Oregon statutes. I learned that in Oregon, knowingly filing a forged deed is a Class C felony with a statutory maximum of 5 years in prison, although prosecutors rarely pursued family cases because juries find them messy. But the civil side, that's where the real weapon lived. If you can prove intentional fraud by clear and convincing evidence, you can recover not just actual damages, but punitive damages under ORS 31, 730 and ORS 93, 780, which allow treble damages, up to 3 times the actual loss, for intentional property fraud, triple damages, on $285,000 property, plus the lost use, plus the rent, plus the mortgage payments, plus emotional distress in certain circumstances. The numbers started to become real to me, not just abstractions, but actual dollar amounts that I wrote in the margins of my textbooks. I spent hours in the clinic's tiny library, a windowless room with law reporters and treatises stacked on metal shelves, highlighting passages with a neon yellow pen until my hand cramped. Professor Hargrove drove the case forward with a kind of relentless, quiet fury that I came to admire deeply. She was like a terrier with a rat, absolutely unwilling to let go. The first thing we did was subpoena the notary journal from the Multnomah County clerk, a process that took 2 weeks and required a court order that a judge signed after a short hearing I didn't even attend. Patricia Kowalski, the notary whose seal was on the forged deed, was a mobile notary who worked out of a UPS store on Hawthorne Boulevard, a little storefront with packing tape and shipping boxes and a notary station in the corner. Her notary journal was a thin, spiral-bound book with carbon copy pages, a format that hadn't changed in decades. The entry for January 12, 2022 at 10:15 a.m. showed a signature line for Margaret A. Voss, a thumbprint in an ink pad that was supposed to be mine, and a checkmark in a box labeled ID verified, driver's license hash, or 8,765,432. The ID number listed didn't match my actual driver's license number, which I still had. It was off by 2 digits, a subtle error that I might not have noticed if I hadn't been looking for it. The thumbprint, according to the notary's log, belonged to Margaret Voss, but the Oregon Secretary of State's office maintains a database of notary seals and journals, and once we had the journal in hand, we could cross-reference it with my actual records. I pulled my work schedule from the clinic's human resources portal, which I accessed from my phone during a break shift. January 12, 2022, I clocked in at 7:58 a.m. and clocked out at 8:17 p.m., a 12-hour shift that was documented with a digital time stamp that couldn't be altered. I pulled the medical records from that day, PDFs of patients I'd helped with, each one bearing my initials and the time I'd signed. A CBC on a dog at 8:45 a.m., an abdominal ultrasound on a cat at 10:02 a.m., a blood draw on another dog at 11:15 a.m., a suture removal at 1 p.m., a dental cleaning preparation at 3 p.m., a fluid therapy check at 5 p.m., a post-op observation at 7 p.m. Every hour I was there. GPS data from my phone, which I downloaded from my Google account history, showed my device stationary at the clinic's address from 7:45 a.m. to 8:30 p.m., a solid blue bar on the timeline. I was never at the UPS store on Hawthorne. I was never in a room with Patricia Kowalski. I was at work, doing my job, holding animals, while a notary I'd never met claimed I was signing away my home for love and affection. The clinic deposed Patricia Kowalski in a conference room at the law school with a court reporter and a video camera. It was the first time I'd ever been in a deposition, and I sat at the back of the room, silent, while Aisha, supervised by Professor Hargrove, asked the questions. Patricia was a nervous woman in her mid-50s, her hair dyed a brassy blonde that was growing out gray at the roots, her hands fidgeting with a pen cap. She wore a floral blouse that was too tight and kept adjusting her collar. Under oath, after a series of preliminary questions about her notary training and experience, Aisha asked her to describe the events of January 12, 2022. Patricia said she'd been at the UPS store, at her usual station, when Celeste Harmon arrived with a woman she introduced as her sister, Margaret. Woman had brown hair, glasses about your height, she said, gesturing vaguely toward me. She seemed quiet. Celeste did most of the talking. She said they needed to transfer a property for estate planning purposes, something about their aunt. She handed me the quitclaim deed form already filled out, and I asked for ID. The woman gave me an Oregon driver's license. I looked at it, saw the name Margaret Voss, and checked the box. I watched her sign the document. Then I notarized it. Aisha asked, "Did you compare the photo on the ID to the person standing in front of you?" Patricia froze. Her pen stopped fidgeting. I glanced at it. I mean, she looked similar. I didn't really study it. Aisha asked, "Did you know Celeste Harmon professionally prior to that day?" Patricia said yes. Celeste had been a client for years. She'd used her notary services for at least a dozen real estate closings, mostly out at the UPS store. Celeste was a regular. She always brought her clients in for notary work. She was very professional. I trusted her. Aisha asked, "So you trusted Celeste Harmon, and because you trusted her, you did not independently verify the identity of the person she presented as her sister?" Patricia's face crumpled. She started to cry. "I made a mistake. I know I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. I didn't think. She's a real estate agent. She has a license. I didn't think she would lie. I didn't check the ID carefully. I looked at it and saw the name and checked the box. I was busy. There was a line. I didn't." That was it. That was the crack in the whole facade. The woman Celeste brought to the UPS store was not me. It was a stand-in, someone who looked enough like me to pass a cursory glance, a woman I still don't know the identity of. Maybe a friend, maybe someone she paid, maybe someone from a Craigslist ad. We never found out. Patricia described her as quiet, about 5'5", brown hair pulled back, wire-rimmed glasses. That fits the description of about 10,000 women in Portland. But the key fact was that Patricia did not check her ID carefully. She glanced at it, saw a name that matched, and stamped the seal. Her lapse, her trust in Celeste, unlocked the entire fraud. When Aisha asked her if she'd be willing to testify to these facts in court, Patricia cried harder and said, "I'll lose my commission. I can't testify against her. She's my client. I've known her for years." Professor Hargrove stepped in and said, "Ms. Kowalski, if you don't testify voluntarily, we will subpoena you, and your testimony will be on the public record either way. Your commission is likely already in jeopardy. The best thing you can do is cooperate." Patricia sobbed and nodded. Her notary commission was later suspended by the Secretary of State, but that's a side note. Next, we subpoenaed Celeste's bank records, a process that took 4 months of back and forth with her lawyers. Her lawyers were from a mid-size firm downtown that specialized in defending real estate professionals, a firm that had represented dozens of agents accused of fraud and always managed to muddy the waters enough to secure settlements. They filed motions to quash, motions for protective orders, motions claiming the subpoena was overly broad. Judge Ockhofer, the circuit court judge assigned to the case, denied everyone. The records arrived on a CD-ROM in a manila envelope, and Aisha and Priya spent 2 days going through them, creating a spreadsheet. There was a separate checking account opened in March 2022, just days after the deed was recorded, under the name Harmon Property Management, with Celeste's social security number. The only deposits into that account over the following 18 months were rent checks from Brent and Tessa, $3, $200 on the first of every month, May 2022 through October 2023. The withdrawals were a perfect ledger of Celeste's spending. April 2022, $8, $900 to Disney Vacation Club. August 2022, $9, $200 to Walt Disney World. September 2022, $4, $750 to Willamette Home Furnishings. October 2022, $15, $300 to Cascade Landscapes LLC for the backyard renovation. November 2022, $35, $000 to Wilsonville Subaru for a down payment on the Blue Outback. And every month, a $200 payment to a Visa card, the charges on which included restaurants, clothing, spa treatments, a monthly house cleaning service, and what looked like a lot of Amazon purchases. Total rent collected, $57,600. Total spent, $57,100. The account's current balance was $497. She'd burned through the money as fast as it came in, like she was in a race to spend it before anyone noticed. Then we got the handwriting analysis. The clinic applied for a grant from a legal aid foundation to hire an expert, and we found Dr. Simon Vreeland, a retired FBI forensic document examiner who had testified in over 200 cases, and now did private consulting out of a home office in Seattle. He was in his early 70s, with a white beard and a quiet, precise way of speaking, The kind of person who could describe a forger's pen lift with the same reverence a surgeon uses to describe an incision. I provided him with a dozen samples of my genuine handwriting. Signed medical records, checks, a handwritten letter I'd sent to a friend in 2019, notes from a journal I'd kept sporadically. He compared them to the signature on the quitclaim deed using a digital microscope, ultraviolet light, and an instrument called a video spectral comparator, which sounds like a Star Trek device, but basically illuminates the invisible pressure changes and ink density variations that the naked eye can't see. His expert report, a 23-page document with full-color exhibits, concluded. The questioned signature on the quitclaim deed dated January 12, 2022, is a trace simulation of the genuine signatures of Margaret A. Voss. The forger used a lightbox or similar method to transfer a pre-existing signature image to the document, resulting in hesitation strokes, even pressure distribution, and multiple unnatural pen lifts, inconsistent with the fluid, rapid execution of the genuine signatures. The probability that the questioned signature was produced by someone other than Margaret A. Voss is 99.7%, with the remaining 0.3% accounting for the possibility of a motor control anomaly in the authentic writer, which is contradicted by the consistent speed and fluency of the known samples. He also noted that the ink on the deed was a common blue ballpoint pen, but the genuine samples were in both blue and black ink, and the pen pressure distribution was measurably different across all samples. It was damning. He filed the civil complaint in Multnomah County Circuit Court on April 3, 2024, a date I've circled on a calendar I keep in my office. The document was 47 pages long, and I read every word of it before Aisha filed it, even the boilerplate language about jurisdiction and venue. It named Celeste Harmon as the defendant and laid out claims for quiet title, fraud, conversion, breach of fiduciary duty, and emotional distress. We sought quiet title restoring my name to the deed. We sought actual damages of $325,000, calculated from the lost use of the property for 2 years, the rent Celeste collected, the mortgage payments I made, the diminution in value from the wear and tear of tenants, and the costs I incurred in alternative housing, the ferret apartment, the storage unit. We sought punitive damages under Oregon law of 3 times the actual damages, for a total of $975,000 in punitives alone. We sought attorney's fees and costs, which the clinic was providing pro bono but which the court could still award as a deterrent. Total ad damnum clause, just over $3 million. The complaint was served by a process server named Mike, a former cop who specialized in high-conflict service. He found Celeste at an open house in Dunthorpe, a $4 million estate she was trying to sell to keep the income flowing, and he served her in front of a couple who were considering making an offer. Mike told me later, with a certain professional satisfaction, that Celeste read the complaint. Her face went white as a sheet of paper, and she said, "You have got to be kidding me. This is ridiculous," before crumpling the front page in her fist. The buyers reportedly excused themselves, got in their car, and drove away. Celeste called me screaming. I was at Donna's apartment, sitting on the broken futon with Gertrude in my lap, quizzing myself on civil procedure flashcards for my paralegal exam. My phone rang, her name on the screen, and I answered. I don't know why I answered. Maybe I wanted to hear her voice when she realized she wasn't invincible. "You're suing me, your own sister. Are you insane?" Her voice was a shriek, not the calm, polished real estate agent she'd been, but a feral, desperate sound. "You will never win, Margaret. I will say you were mentally incompetent. I will say you gave me the deed as a gift because you couldn't handle the responsibility, and now you're fabricating this whole story because you're jealous of my life. I will drag this out until you're homeless and broke, and you'll wish you'd never been born. I have lawyers, Margaret. Good lawyers. You have what? Some law school clinic run by children? You're going to be buried. I'll file a motion to dismiss tomorrow. This is a joke." I said nothing. I held the phone to my ear and I listened to her threats and her insults and her revisionist history until she ran out of breath and shouted, "Are you even there? Say something, you coward." I hung up. Then I forwarded a recording of the call, which I'd made on a voice memo app, to Professor Hargrove. Threatening a litigant is a terrible look in front of a judge. Now, this is where you'd expect the triumphant courtroom scene. The soaring music, the gavel banging, the jury foreman declaring victory. But I'm going to pause here, because at the midpoint of this nightmare, my family came back. They came back not because they'd seen the light, not because they wanted to apologize, but because they needed something. It was August 2024. The lawsuit was crawling through discovery, delayed by a dozen motions from Celeste's lawyers, who were doing exactly what she'd promised. Filing every possible objection, every continuance, every motion to compel or to limit discovery, trying to bleed me out with delays because they knew I wasn't paying hourly legal fees. The case was going nowhere fast, but it was going, and the weight of it was a constant, low-grade hum in my head. I was still living at Donna's, still working the overnight shift, still paying the mortgage on the condo every month, now $1, 200 times 28 months, $33, 600 paid toward a home I still couldn't enter. My paralegal program was finished, and I'd passed the certification exam with a score in the 95th percentile, a moment of pure joy that I celebrated by buying myself a burrito from a food cart and eating it on a park bench in the sun, the first meal I'd bought myself in months that wasn't just calories for survival. I was volunteering at the legal clinic full-time, helping other victims of title fraud, widows whose stepsons had forged deeds, elderly homeowners whose caregivers had tricked them into quitclaims, people whose stories were echoes of my own. And then my phone rang, and it was Derek, Celeste's husband. He sounded terrible, his voice thick and slurred, and for a second I thought he was drunk, but it was much worse. "Margaret, it's Derek. I'm at OSU, the brain injury ICU. I had The doctors say it was a berry aneurysm. In my brainstem, I nearly died. I'm still in the ICU. I sat down on the futon, the room suddenly very still. Derek and I were never close, but he'd always been kind to me. A big, cheerful guy who grilled burgers at family barbecues and never once made me feel like the lesser sister. He'd married into the chaos and had done his best to be a buffer. I said, "Oh my God, Derek, what happened? Are you okay? What can I do?" He said, "I don't know. I collapsed at the dealership. They're doing another surgery tomorrow. I wanted someone to know. Celeste is a wreck. She's not handling it well. The kids are scared. They're staying with the neighbors. I don't know what's going to happen to us." Derek had collapsed in the middle of a sales meeting, in front of a couple looking at a certified pre-owned Toyota Highlander. One moment he was talking about financing rates and the lifetime powertrain warranty. The next he was on the floor, seizing, blood pouring from his nose as the blood vessels in his brain ruptured. A berry aneurysm is a small bulge on an artery wall, a congenital weak spot that can sit there for decades, harmless, until one day it pops like a water balloon. If the bleed is in the brainstem, it's catastrophic, a coin flip between life and death. Derek got the good side of the coin, but barely. He was airlifted by life flight to OSU, the teaching hospital on the hill, and spent 14 hours in surgery while neurosurgeons clipped the aneurysm and repaired the damaged vessel with microscopic precision. Then he spent 2 weeks in the neuro ICU, sedated and intubated, his brain pressure monitored by a bolt drilled through his skull, his vitals on a dozen screens. Then a month in a step-down unit, learning to blink, to swallow, to speak in full sentences. Then another month in inpatient rehab at a facility in Vancouver, relearning to walk with a cane, to remember the names of his children, to balance a checkbook. The doctors said the road ahead was long, maybe years, and that he'd likely never regain full cognitive function to the level he'd had before. He might return to work, but not to a high-stress job managing a dealership with 40 employees and monthly sales quotas. He might need lifetime physical therapy. He would definitely need ongoing medical monitoring, expensive scans every 6 months, a cardiologist and neurologist on speed dial. The financial impact was immediate and total. Derek's health insurance was through his employer, a regional auto group with 50 locations across the Pacific Northwest. After 90 days on short-term disability, when it became clear he wasn't returning soon, the company terminated his employment, and the insurance lapsed at the end of the month. COBRA continuation for the family plan would cost $800 a month. Celeste and Derek had spent all their liquid savings on the backyard renovation and the Disney trip and the Subaru, and Celeste's real estate commissions had dried up completely because she'd been so consumed with Derek's illness and the lawsuit and 2 scared children that she'd stopped showing houses or prospecting clients. Her income for 2024 up to that point was around $18,000 maybe less. Their mortgage on the Lake Oswego house was $4, $200 a month, plus property taxes that worked out to another $1, $100 a month when averaged out. They had car payments, now 2 cars because they'd kept the minivan after the Subaru was repossessed, but still payments. Private school tuition for 2 kids at St. Mary's, $1, $800 a month total. Utility bills, credit card minimums, food. The math didn't work. The math hadn't worked for a while, even before Derek got sick, but they'd been floating on the rent money from my condo and Derek's income and Celeste's occasional big commissions. Now the rent money was gone, the condo was tied up in a lawsuit, and Derek was in a hospital bed. By October, they were 3 months behind on the mortgage, and the bank had started sending notices of default, the first step in foreclosure. By November, Celeste was selling furniture on Facebook Marketplace. The new beige linen living room set for $1, $800, the patio furniture from the backyard renovation for $600, Derek's collection of vintage baseball cards for $400, her Louis Vuitton handbag for $700. She let go of the housekeeper and the landscaper. The kids, Lily and Ben, were pulled out of private school and enrolled in the local public elementary, a perfectly good school, but not the one Celeste had bragged about at family dinners, not the one with the Mandarin immersion program and the one iPad ratio. By December, she'd missed 2 car payments, and the minivan was on the verge of repossession. The Lake Oswego house entered formal foreclosure, with a trustee's sale scheduled for late February 2025. They were drowning, and the only asset they had, the one thing with real value that could be sold or borrowed against to save their home and pay for Derek's ongoing care, was my condo. The condo Celeste had stolen. The condo that was tied up in litigation with a lis pendens on the title, a notice to the world that ownership was disputed, which meant no bank would lend against it, and no buyer would buy it without a massive discount. Celeste was trapped. She couldn't access the equity because I was fighting her. She couldn't sell because of me. She couldn't even borrow against it because no lender would touch a property with a pending fraud lawsuit. So she did the one thing I never expected. She showed up at the Ferret apartment. It was a Tuesday evening in early December, the kind of cold, drizzly Portland night where the rain is more of a floating mist and the streetlights make wet halos on the pavement. I was in my room, sitting on the futon with Gertrude on my lap, reviewing a draft motion for summary judgment that Professor Hargrove was planning to file. I heard a knock on the front door, soft at first, then louder. Donna was at her boyfriend Steve's place, as she often was on Tuesday nights, so the apartment was quiet except for the ferrets rustling in their cage. I opened the door, and there was Celeste. She looked like a ghost of herself. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy bun that was coming apart. She wore no makeup, which was unusual for her, and her face was pale and blotchy, with dark circles under her eyes that looked like bruises. She was wearing yoga pants and a raincoat that was too thin for the December chill, and she was shivering. Behind her in the parking lot, I could see her minivan, the interior light on. In the back seat, Lily and Ben, ages 6 and 9, were watching something on an iPad, their faces lit by the blue glow. The van was cluttered with fast food wrappers and what looked like a pile of laundry. And Celeste looked at me, her eyes hollow and red-rimmed, and she started to cry real tears, the kind that come from a place so deep you can't fake them. "Margaret, please. I know I've done terrible things. I know I've hurt you. I don't have any excuse. Derek is going to deteriorate if he doesn't get the right rehab, and the insurance is gone, and the house is in foreclosure, and I need to sell the condo. I can get $300,000 for it, maybe more with the market the way it is. You can have the money. I'll give you every single dollar. Just let me sell it. Lift the lis pendens just for 30 days so I can close a sale. You can live in our basement in Lake Oswego. It's finished. It has its own bathroom. You can have the minivan. I'll pay you back everything I took with interest. I'll sign a promissory note. I'll do anything. Just please, please help us. I'm begging you, Margaret, for Derek, for Lily and Ben. They're going to lose their home. They're already scared out of their minds." I stood in the doorway, the cold air seeping into the ferret-scented apartment, and I looked at my sister, the woman who'd taught me how to braid my hair in the bathtub when I was 5, sitting cross-legged on the bathroom floor with a spray bottle and a box of tiny rubber bands, her fingers moving gently through my tangles. The woman who'd held my hand at Mom's funeral while I sobbed, even if she'd been eyeing the jewelry box earlier. The woman who'd stolen my home, forged my name, rented my condo to strangers, and cashed $57,600 in rent checks while I ate saltines and slept on a broken futon with ferrets. And I felt, for just a second, a terrible pull of pity. It was the pity of a lifetime of being the one who absorbed everyone else's chaos, the one who softened the blows, the one who never made a fuss. Then I saw her eyes flick past me, scanning the apartment behind my shoulder. The peeling linoleum floor, the ferret toys scattered near the cage, the bare light bulb in the hallway, the sagging futon visible through the half-open door. And there was a micro-expression, a tiny wrinkle at the corner of her mouth, half a second of disgust, and then it was gone, smoothed back into desperation. But I saw it, and I remembered everything. I said, "Celeste, I'm not going to lift the Liss pendants, but I'm not going to let Derek suffer because of what you did. I'll set up a GoFundMe for his medical expenses. I'll call every favor I have. I'll donate the first $1,000 myself from my savings, which isn't much, but it's something. I'll help coordinate meals and childcare for the kids. I'm happy to take Lily and Ben for weekends if you need a break. I'll drive them to school, I'll pack their lunches, I'll do whatever they need. But the condo is mine, and you're going to answer for what you did in court. That's not negotiable." She stared at me, her tears stopping as abruptly as if a faucet had been shut off. Her face changed, the desperation hardening into something else. "You'd rather see Derek suffer permanent brain damage than forgive your sister. After everything I've done for you. I raised you, Margaret. When Mom was sick with cancer, I was the one who picked up the slack. I was the one who made sure you had Christmas presents under the tree and a cake on your birthday. I sacrificed for you, and this is how you repay me. By letting my husband become a vegetable." I said, "You forged my signature and stole my home. You made $57,000 from my grief. You never apologized, not once. Not even now. Even now you're here because you need something from me, not because you're sorry. This isn't about forgiveness. This is about consequences. I didn't do this to you. You did this to you. I'm just finally not cleaning up your mess." She called me a few names I won't repeat here. Some of them were creative. She said I was dead to her, that the family would never speak to me again, that I was a monster, that I was worse than the cancer that killed our mother. Her voice rose to a shriek, echoing in the parking lot. Lily, in the back of the van, looked up from the iPad and watched us through the window. She waved at me, a small uncertain wave, her hand barely lifted. I waved back, my heart cracking. Then Celeste grabbed my arm, her nails digging in hard enough to leave marks I'd still see the next morning, and said, "You're going to regret this. I'll make sure everyone knows what you did. You'll be the villain in every version of this story. Enjoy your ferrets, you pathetic loser." I pulled my arm away, gently but firmly, and I closed the door. I slid down the wall and sat on the cold, peeling linoleum floor, my knees pulled to my chest, and I shook for an hour. Gertrude crawled into my lap and purred, her old, cracked purr that sounded like a tiny engine with a misfire. I did not lift the Liss pendants. The trial was scheduled for January 2025, after months of discovery battles and Celeste's attempts to delay. The court had denied her motion to dismiss, denied her motion for summary judgment, denied her motion to suppress the handwriting evidence, denied her request to change venue to Clackamas County, where she thought a jury would be more sympathetic. Judge Aucoffer, a stern black woman in her 50s with a reputation for running a tight courtroom, had finally said, "Ms. Harmon, we are trying this case on the scheduled date. I have no patience for further procedural games. Your motion for continuance is denied. Be ready on Monday." The trial lasted 4 days. The courtroom was a medium-sized one on the 4th floor of the Multnomah County Courthouse, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed softly, and a tall window that looked out over the Willamette River, gray and swift in the January light. The jury was 8 people, 6 women and 2 men, ranging from a retired teacher to a software engineer to a grocery store cashier. They looked like Portland. Celeste's defense attorney was a man named Mr. Latham, a smooth-talking lawyer from the same firm that had been delaying us for months. He wore expensive suits and had a way of standing that made him look taller than he was. His strategy was to paint the whole thing as a misunderstanding, a family dispute that had spiraled out of control, and me as an unstable, vindictive woman who was jealous of Celeste's success and trying to tear her down. In his opening statement, he said, "This is not a fraud case. This is a family feud dressed up in legal language. Margaret Voss was overwhelmed with homeownership, and her sister Celeste, with the best of intentions, offered to help. Margaret signed the deed voluntarily, perhaps without fully understanding it. And now, years later, she's claiming forgery as an act of revisionist history. The evidence will show that Margaret was emotionally fragile, living in unstable conditions, and that she is now lashing out at the one person who has always been her greatest supporter. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Professor Hargrove, my hands folded, my face as neutral as I could make it. Professor Hargrove was magnificent. She called me as the first witness, and I told my story from the beginning in a slow, steady voice that I'd practiced in my room with Gertrude as the audience. I talked about Lorraine, the will, the condo, the day I found the note on my door, the phone call with Celeste, the county records, the police, the lawyer I couldn't afford. I told them about the mortgage payments, the ferret apartment, Gertrude's UTI, the McDonald's cup, the cat hammock. I cried a little at one point when I talked about Lorraine's note and her instruction to water the fern, but I pulled myself together. Latham cross-examined me for over an hour, trying to trip me up on dates, on details, on whether I'd ever said anything to anyone about being overwhelmed. "Isn't it true that you told your coworker Janelle Rourke that the condo was a lot of pressure?" I said, "No. I might have said I was stressed about the lawsuit, but I never said I wanted to give up the condo." He asked me about my weight loss, my living situation, my emotional state, trying to paint me as someone whose testimony couldn't be trusted because I was a mess. I admitted I was a mess, that I'd lost weight, that I'd cried in the break room, that I'd sometimes looked disheveled at work. "But being a mess doesn't make me a liar," I said, looking at the jury. "It makes me someone whose sister stole her home and spent 2 years gaslighting her." Then Professor Hargrove called Patricia Kowalski, the former notary. She was nervous, her voice shaking, but she told the truth. She testified that she had not checked the ID of the woman Celeste brought, that she had trusted Celeste because of their professional relationship, and that she now believed she had been used. She said, under direct examination, "I was negligent. I made a terrible mistake. Because of my negligence, Miss Voss lost her home, and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. I am deeply, deeply sorry." Latham tried to attack her credibility, pointing out that her commission had been suspended, that she was testifying under a subpoena, but it didn't land. The jury looked at her with a kind of sad sympathy. Then Dr. Vreeland, the forensic document examiner, took the stand. He brought his digital microscope display, and he walked the jury through every hesitation stroke, every even pressure line, every unnatural pen lift. He showed them side-by-side comparisons of my actual signature, and the forged one, blown up to poster size, the tracing artifacts circled in red. He used a laser pointer to indicate the subtle tremors, the points where the forger's hand had paused and left a tiny ink pool. He said, "A genuine signature is a ballistic movement, a muscle memory. Your hand moves without your brain consciously guiding each stroke. This signature is a drawing, not a signature." The forger traced a pre-existing image of Margaret Voss's name, slowly and deliberately, and the result is a document that is, to a certainty of 99.7%, not written by Margaret Voss. Latham tried to challenge his methodology, asking about error rates and the validity of handwriting analysis as a forensic science. Dr. Vreeland cited a dozen studies and 3 appellate decisions that had upheld the admissibility of this exact method. The jury was paying close attention. Then Celeste took the stand, and it was a disaster for the defense. She was coached, dressed in a modest navy dress and low heels, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. But coaching only goes so far when your entire defense is that your sister secretly wanted to give you her home for free and then forgot about it. Under direct examination by Latham, she said, "I was trying to help my sister." She was overwhelmed. She told me multiple times that she wished she didn't have the responsibility of the condo, that the old building had problems, that the HOA was a hassle. She asked me to take it over. We discussed it over coffee at the Hawthorne Coffee House in early January, and she agreed to sign the quitclaim. I didn't forge anything. I would never do that to my own sister. Latham entered into evidence a photograph of Celeste and me at a family barbecue, both of us smiling to show the jury we'd been close. It was a photo from 2015, 7 years before any of this happened. Under cross-examination, Professor Hargrove approached the witness stand like a shark. "Miss Harmon, you say your sister asked you to take the condo. Why, then, did you not tell anyone in the family about this generous gift? Why didn't you tell your father, your husband, your estate attorney? Any of your friends?" Celeste said, I didn't want to embarrass her. She's a very private person. Hargrove said, you didn't want to embarrass her by telling people she'd given you a $285,000 condo. Silence. And if she was so overwhelmed, why did she continue making mortgage payments every single month on time for 2 years while she was supposedly homeless and broke? Celeste said, I don't. I can't explain why she did that. Maybe she forgot to cancel the auto pay. Murmurs in the gallery. And why, Miss Harmon, did you never once thank your sister for this supposed gift? In any text message, any email, any phone call? Celeste said, I thanked her in person. Hargrove said, when? No answer. Then Professor Hargrove played the recording of the phone call from April 2024, the one where Celeste threatened to bury me, call me mentally incompetent, drag me until I was homeless. The courtroom filled with Celeste's voice, loud and venomous. I will say you were mentally incompetent. I will say you gave me the deed as a gift. I will drag this out until you're homeless and broke and you'll wish you'd never been born. The jurors' faces shifted. The retired teacher looked down at her hands. The software engineer's mouth tightened. Celeste's face went blotchy red. She said, that was taken out of context. I was upset. I'd just been served with $1 million lawsuit by my own sister. Anyone would be upset. Hargrove said, you were upset that your fraud was being exposed, isn't that correct? Latham objected, and Judge Aucaffer sustained it, but the damage was done. The recording hung in the air like smoke. The final witness was Brent, the California tenant, who testified via Zoom from his new apartment in San Diego, where he and Tessa had moved after their lease ended. He was a friendly, soft-spoken man with a beard and a hoodie, and he said they'd never met me, never knew the ownership was disputed until the court informed them, and that they'd been told by Celeste that the previous owner was a distant relative who'd moved away. We had no idea, he said. We just wanted a nice place to live. That sealed the narrative for the jury. Innocent tenants, a clueless notary, a sister with a recorded threat, and me, the scapegoat who'd been paying a mortgage on a stolen home. Closing arguments were short. Latham said reasonable minds could differ, that this was a he said, she said, that the burden of proof hadn't been met. Professor Hargrove said, this is not he said, she said. This is he said versus forensic evidence, bank records, GPS data, time-stamped medical records, an expert witness, and a notary who admitted she was negligent. The evidence of intentional fraud is overwhelming, and Miss Voss has suffered for 2 years. She deserves her home back, and she deserves to see justice done. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. I sat on a wooden bench in the hallway, Gertrude's picture on my phone wallpaper, a text from Janelle, the receptionist, wishing me luck. You're going to win this, girl. You're the strongest person I know. Professor Hargrove brought me a cup of water from the fountain. I held it but didn't drink. When the bailiff called us back in, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely push open the courtroom door. The foreman stood, a middle-aged man in a sweater vest who had taken notes the whole trial, a small moleskine notebook filled with his cramped handwriting. He read the verdict. On the claim of fraud, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Margaret Voss. On the claim of quiet title, we find that title to the property located at 2345 Northwest 23rd Avenue, Unit 3B, should be restored to Margaret Voss, effective immediately. We award actual damages of $325,000. We award punitive damages of $650,000. Not the full treble, but double the actuals, which is what the jury felt was appropriate. The total judgment with actuals, punitives, and the $110,000 in court-awarded attorney's fees came to $1,085,000. The bailiff banged the gavel, and the sound echoed in the silent room. Celeste collapsed at the defense table. Not theatrically, not a slow slide. Her legs just buckled, and she slumped sideways, her head hitting the edge of the table with a sickening crack that made the entire courtroom gasp. For one horrible second, my body moved before my brain could stop it, a reflex honed over 32 years of being the one who catches people when they fall. I stood up. I actually took a step toward her. Then I stopped. I stood there, frozen, and I let Derek's cousin, who was sitting in the gallery, rush to the defense table and catch her before she hit the floor. I let the bailiff call for a medic. I let the consequences finally land without me cushioning the blow. I sat back down. I looked at Professor Hargrove, who was watching me with a calm, steady expression. She nodded once, small and sure, and I nodded back. Aftermath. The judgment was huge, but collecting it was a different challenge. In the weeks after the trial, we did an asset search, and discovered that Celeste and Derek's financial situation was even worse than we'd thought. The Lake Oswego house had already been sold at a foreclosure auction a month earlier for $220,000, which was less than the mortgage balance, meaning they owed the bank a deficiency of about $80,000. The Subaru Outback had been repossessed in November and sold at auction for $18,000. The minivan was repossessed 2 weeks after the trial. The Harmon Property Management Bank account had $497 in it. The credit cards were maxed. There were no savings, no investments, nothing. Celeste filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in February 2025, hoping to discharge the judgment, along with all her other debts. Aisha, now a newly minted lawyer who'd passed the bar on her first try, filed an adversary proceeding in the bankruptcy court, arguing that fraud judgments are non-dischargeable under Section 523(a)(2)(a) of the Bankruptcy Code. She was right. The bankruptcy judge agreed, ruling that Celeste's debt to me was a result of intentional fraud and would survive bankruptcy forever. But here's the thing we discovered during the asset search, a detail that I hadn't known and that Celeste had carefully hidden. Our Aunt Lorraine had not just left Celeste the Subaru. She had also left her a 5-acre parcel of undeveloped forest land in Clackamas County, near Estacada, that was valued in the estate at $80,000. Celeste had sold that land to a developer 6 months after Lorraine's death, in March 2022, for $82,000, and she had deposited the proceeds into a separate account that she then emptied into the Harmon Property Management account. She had concealed the sale on the estate's tax filings, which was another layer of fraud. Because she'd hidden the asset from the estate and from the IRS, and because she dissipated the funds during the fraudulent scheme, the court allowed us to trace those funds via a constructive trust, and we clawed back $60,000 from the clawback order, which went toward the judgment. The rest of the judgment is being collected in pieces, slowly. A writ of garnishment was placed on Celeste's future earnings, 25% of her gross wages or commissions for the next 10 years, automatically deducted by her employer and sent to the court. In Oregon, real estate agents must disclose any civil judgments over $10,000 to the Oregon Real Estate Agency when they renew their licenses, and the agency launched an investigation after the trial concluded. Her license was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation, and it has since been revoked. She can no longer sell real estate in Oregon. She now works as an office manager for a plumbing supply company in Clackamas, a job she got through a friend of a friend, making $45,000 a year. She lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in a complex off I-205, the kind of place with thin walls and a pool that's always green. Last quarter, I received a garnishment check for $214, $38 deducted from her wages. I donated it to the Oregon Humane Society in Lorraine's name with a note that said, "For the cats." Derek recovered, slowly. The aneurysm left him with cognitive deficits, memory problems, slower processing speed, occasional word-finding difficulties. He walks with a cane, he can no longer drive, and he can't return to the high-stakes world of car sales. But he's alive. He's present. He moved in with his parents in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and the kids, Lily and Ben, went with him during the school year because Celeste couldn't afford childcare and worked long hours. They enrolled in a good public school there, and they're adjusting as well as can be expected when your parents' marriage has crumbled, and your mom is a convicted fraudster, and your dad is relearning how to tie his shoes. I send them birthday cards and gifts every year, and last year I set up a UTMA college fund for each of them with $10,000 from the damages I recovered, in accounts that Celeste cannot access. The accounts are held at a credit union, and the statements come to my address. I will not punish those kids for their mother's choices. They're innocent, and they know their aunt loves them, even if their mother tells a different story in the group chats I'm not part of. I moved back into the condo in February 2025, the day after the court issued the writ of possession. Brent and Tessa had moved out at the end of their lease in November 2024, having been informed by the court of the title situation well in advance. They were cooperative and even apologetic, though they'd done nothing wrong. They left the wind chimes on the balcony with a note written on a piece of printer paper, folded and taped to the railing. We think these belong here. We're so sorry about everything. You have a beautiful home. Brent and Tessa and Motshai. I hung the wind chimes back on the hook, and they've been there ever since. I changed the locks on the first day I returned, a shiny new deadbolt and a doorknob with a key code. I threw out the bamboo blinds and the cat hammock and the IKEA furniture they'd left behind. I repainted the bedroom from sage green to a color called sea salt, a soft gray blue that reminds me of the Oregon coast, because I wanted something that was mine, not the person I was before all this happened. I scrubbed every surface with bleach and then with an all-natural cleaner that smelled like lavender. I aired out the rooms for 3 days, even in the cold. Gertrude came home and immediately claimed the emerald sofa, drooling on the same spot she'd drooled on for the 2 years before. And I adopted a second cat from the Oregon Humane Society, a one-eyed tuxedo named Barnaby who'd been found in a dumpster behind a restaurant on Alberta Street. Barnaby is missing his left eye from an infection that went untreated, and he walks with a slight limp, and he is the sweetest, most affectionate cat I've ever known. He and Gertrude are indifferent to each other, which in cat terms is a successful blended family. I paid off the remaining mortgage balance with the damages I collected, the full $62,000 original balance that I'd paid down to about $48,000 with my relentless monthly payments. The condo is now mine, free and clear, no mortgage, no lien, no one who can take it from me ever again. I water Phillies the fern on Wednesdays, just like Lorraine's note said. She's thriving, sending out new fronds that unfurl like little green scrolls. I drink my coffee on the balcony every morning, sitting in one of the mismatched chairs from the dining set, under the wind chimes, and I listen to the lion fountain gurgle in the courtyard below. I am now a certified paralegal, working at the same community property rights project that took my case. I make $52,000 a year, a little more than I made as a vet tech, and I have health insurance and a 401(k) again. I help people who are in the position I was in, victims of title fraud, predatory lending, familial property theft, elder financial abuse. Every person who walks through our clinic door with a story like mine, a story of a family member who forged a deed or a caregiver who tricked an elderly parent or a spouse who hid assets in a divorce, I sit with them and I listen and I say, it's going to be hard. It might be the hardest thing you've ever done. But you're not alone. Because I wasn't alone in the end. I had Professor Hargrove and Aisha in the clinic. I had a judge who saw the truth. I had a jury of 8 strangers who believed me. I had Lorraine's voice in my head saying, you need a roof that no one can take from you. And I fought for it. The lien on Celeste is still active, and it will be for as long as it takes. I expect I'll get small quarterly checks for the rest of her working life, and every check, whether it's $200 or $2, will go to the Oregon Humane Society because Lorraine loved animals and because it feels like a quiet, dignified way to keep score. Celeste calls me on my birthday every year. I don't answer. The call goes to voicemail, and she leaves a message that usually says something like, I hope you're happy, and then a pause, and then, I'm sorry. She never specifies what she's sorry for. Maybe the condo, maybe the years, maybe the whole catastrophe. Maybe she doesn't know. Maybe she never will. I have blocked my father's number because he chose his peace over my justice, and I don't owe him access to my life. The rest of the family has taken sides, and I've let them. The people who matter have my address. They know where the balcony is. Edit. To the folks asking why I didn't just call the cops when I found the forged deed, I did. I called them multiple times. I filed a report in person at the precinct, and Detective Ruiz was sympathetic but honest. The district attorney's office told him off the record that they'd consider it a civil matter unless there was a pattern of fraud or the loss exceeded $1 million, because it involved a family member and a notarized document. That's the reality of property crime enforcement in a city with limited resources and a huge backlog of violent crime. If you don't have the money to litigate, you're out of luck. I was out of luck until the clinic took my case. That's part of why I work there now. I'm trying to build a bridge for the next Margit. Edit 2. Some of you are furious that I ruined my niece and nephew's lives. I want to be very, very clear about this. I did not foreclose on their house. The bank foreclosed because Celeste and Derek stopped paying the mortgage months before Derek's aneurysm, while they were still spending money on a pool heater and a family trip to Disney World. The foreclosure process began in October 2024, before the trial even happened. I had nothing to do with it. And as I said, I set up college funds for Lily and Ben with my own money I recovered from the judgment. I love those kids. I send them gifts on their birthdays. I video chat with them on Sunday afternoons when Derek puts them on the call. I refuse to let my sister's crimes define my relationship with them, and I also refuse to be a doormat so their mom can continue living above her means. You can hold both truths in your head at the same time. It's not hard. Edit 3. The most common comment I get is that I should have forgiven Celeste when Derek was in the hospital and lifted the Liss pendants to save their family. Let me be precise about this. I did forgive her, in the emotional sense. I processed it in therapy, which I started about 6 months into the lawsuit, with a wonderful counselor who specializes in family estrangement. I don't carry daily rage towards Celeste anymore. I'm not losing sleep thinking about her, but forgiveness is not the same as absolution. It doesn't mean reversing the legal and financial consequences of a crime. It doesn't mean returning stolen property. It doesn't mean pretending the harm didn't happen. When Derek was in the ICU, I visited him twice. I sat with him for 3 hours one afternoon while Celeste was at a therapy session, reading him the sports page, holding his hand, trying to make him smile. I cried in the parking lot afterward. I didn't hate Derek. I didn't even hate Celeste in that pure, uncomplicated way. I hated what she did, and I hated that she'd put me in a position where my survival required her failure. But I didn't cause her failure. She caused it. I just finally stopped cushioning the fall. Edit 4. Yes, I feel guilty. I feel guilt all the time. It's a background hum, like the Banfield traffic from my old room. I feel guilty that Lily and Ben had to switch schools and leave their friends. I feel guilty that Derek had to move to Idaho and live with his parents at age 40. I feel guilty that my family fractured, that Thanksgiving doesn't happen anymore, that my father sits alone in Milwaukee wondering where it all went wrong. But guilt is not the same as regret. I regret that my sister is a fraudster. I regret that she chose to steal from me after I'd been the one holding our mother's hand while she died. I don't regret fighting back. The guilt is the price of standing up for myself after a lifetime of shrinking. I pay it every day, and it gets a little lighter each time. Edit 5. My father called me about a year after the trial and said he'd been in therapy too. He said he'd spent his life enabling Celeste because he was afraid of conflict, afraid of her anger, afraid of admitting that his golden child was broken. He finally saw, he said, what that had cost me. We had a long, halting conversation, full of pauses and tears. He said he was sorry. I said I wasn't ready to trust him yet, but I appreciated the call and I was proud of him for doing the work. We talk every few weeks now, short calls, careful. We're rebuilding slowly. Not every relationship has to be destroyed forever, but some do, and that's okay. What would you have done? If your sister forged your name on a quitclaim deed, stole your condo, rented it out for 2 years, and pocketed $40,000 in rent while you paid the mortgage and slept on a broken futon with ferrets, would you have let it go? Would you have let her sell the condo to save her husband? The condo your aunt left you with the specific instruction that no one could take it. The condo you'd painted sage green and filled with first editions and a rescue cat who wheezed in her sleep. I made my choice. I stood up, and every morning when I wake up in my own bedroom, in my own home, with my own cats curled at the foot of the bed, I know that Lorraine was right. She left me the keys because she knew I was the one who would fight for them. And I did. And if that makes me the villain in a group chat I'm not even part of, then I'll take that title and frame it next to the first editions.